Well, thank you for joining us. We're just in the midst of this summer series, having the best summer we can have. I don't remember what we called it.
Best summer yet.
Oh, that one.
That'll do.
And if you noticed, we've got a new backdrop. So take a few moments, admire the backdrop. All right, that's enough. Okay, we are on the fourth video of this series, and we're kind of just revisiting the 4 ingredients that are important to have a thriving community.
Mm-hmm.
We did a series about this that we started last fall and went into the beginning of this year. We're in the series, we kind of used the book and also the work of Dr. Jim Wilder, but the book that he wrote with Michael Hendricks called The Other Half of Church. And we kind of use that as a launching pad for this series. In the book, it names 4 ingredients that are integral to a growing community.
Mm-hmm.
And those 4 ingredients are joy, hesed, attachment love, group identity, and healthy correction. And just to quickly, we met in person and we're talking about joy. We put a video on hesed, but just joy, we're talking about joy being relational in nature, the idea of that, that feeling we get when we see that people are happy to be with us.
Sure, and maybe just before we jump too far into joy, the difference between what we did before and what we're doing this summer is summer is typically a slower time of the year, and gives us a chance to spend some extra time with our family and maybe develop some relationships and maybe even work on ourselves a little bit. So we're just trying to take the idea of the 4 ingredients and things that we might do to have a better summer.
Yeah, all right. So back to joy.
Back to joy.
So it's relational in nature.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea, again, when we notice that someone's happy to be with us,
Mm-hmm.
Joy is fuel for the brain. It's really important. And gratitude is a really important part of how joy gets built. And we need to have that exercise going on so that joy is building in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Hesed, which is basically, it's about love, and it's bringing a concrete definition to it. The idea of love and the idea of faithfulness, steadfastness, and enduring. And really a love that's expressed in connection and secure attachment.
So again, it's a relational attribute.
Very relational.
Right, and the two kind of go together as we spend more time with each other because we like each other, we experience joy with each other, we develop a deeper relationship, which helps us to learn to love another person, and the two kind of build off each other. The more joy we have, the more the love builds, the more the love builds, the more joy we have. So.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important thing just to keep in mind. And the idea is that we don't pick and choose the ingredients. In fact, I would say as we move into these next 2, group identity, and then next week when we get into a healthy correction, if joy and hesed, the attachment love, aren't the foundation of these going forth, these actually next 2 don't really work as well.
No, you have to develop those. They literally go in order.
They lay the groundwork for it. So today we are talking about group identity.
Group identity. What is group identity?
Yeah. So essentially, it's asking the question when we talk about group identity is how do our people respond or act in any given situation?
Sure.
More specifically, it's how to respond when we experience one or a combination of one of the big emotions. And just to recap, I don't know if you want to share what those 6 big emotions that actually register on our brain are.
Yeah, that's shame, fear, disgust, despair, sadness, and anger.
That's right. And the interesting thing that I when we were originally kind of going through this that I found fascinating was these emotions happen on the right side of the brain.
Yep.
And they're faster than cognitive thought.
Sure. So we have a reaction before we can think about what to do.
Yeah, it's like when something happens, we're not just like, oh, I think I should feel shame in this moment. It's like it's there, it's embedded, we're feeling whatever that's happened.
Yeah.
And so group identity is about kind of the characteristics of our people.
So who are our people?
Well, those who we're connected with.
Yeah.
This is where we go back to the ideas, those we have established joy, and specifically very much hesed with, we're attached to.
But specifically, we're talking about
our
people in our church community. Yeah. People who are followers of Jesus along with us, and we're trying to help each other be better followers of Jesus.
That's right.
Okay.
And so when we talk about group identity, we're really talking about the idea of remaining ourselves, maturely responding when these big emotions are triggered, because they will be.
Yep.
And again, we're defining it like basically the idea is that we remain ourselves as we experience these.
Sure.
So these emotions, they come fast, they come strong, and they will. It's never about if we feel these emotions, it's when.
Mm-hmm.
And do we remain ourselves? And that's really what we call it, kind of defining when we talk about the idea of maturity.
Sure.
Is that our ability to remain ourselves in any given situation. It's not about we don't feel these emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It's we remain ourselves as we feel these emotions, as strong as they might be.
Right. And I think it isn't specifically said here, but that in conjunction with healthy correction, you can actually change how you respond to the big emotions. So if you have a problem with anger and you're whatever triggers you to be angry, you can actually change, because it seems when I first read this, I thought, oh no, I can't. There's no way to change it.
Yeah.
In that, if it's automatic before I can think about it, but there is a process that goes through first establishing group identity and then having healthy correction. You can actually change and become more mature.
That's right, and that's a little bit the important part of having this group identity. It is in a lot of ways updating those those images that we have of response, because sometimes those images are not healthy.
No.
And that's because we're people who are going through different hurts and different experiences, and sometimes we haven't had the best demonstration because the people that demonstrated for us didn't have the best demonstration either.
To them, yeah. So our origin family has a lot to do with it. Yeah.
Exactly. And therefore, it is about having the group identity about updating, and we'll get into that a little bit.
Sure.
So first thing we want to start about is where our identity comes from. And
that's a good question.
It's a great question, and it really isn't a trick one. We are followers of
Jesus.
Yeah, so that's really, when we come right down to it, that's where our identity comes from.
So that's where we need to this is where when we talked about reading the Bible before, especially the teachings of Jesus and the life of Jesus, he modeled for us what our identity should be.
Absolutely. And Paul would write this in Romans chapter 8:29. He said, "For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn in amount of many brothers and sisters." And when it was firstborn, it's really about original intent, model. This is who we're looking towards. And so, we look at the life of Jesus, what he taught, what he demonstrated.
Sure.
And we can look at even early followers, like when we look at some of the letters, like 1 John, for instance, and we see how they responded to Jesus and that identity. That helps us sort of start to form this. So when we did this, we kind of picked out a few traits that we kind of through the life of Jesus, through his teachings. By no means is this list exhaustive, but here let's maybe share some of those traits that we do believe are encouraged by Jesus, taught by Jesus, and demonstrated.
That we should be demonstrating in our lives. So there's gratefulness. Again, just learning to be thankful and grateful for the good things that happen in our life, and even being able to endure bad things. Faithfulness, compassion, kindness. So those are the kind of two sides of the same coin. Then again, humility and gentleness and patience, generosity, loving our enemies. That's a big one.
That's a huge one.
That's I think it's impossible in our own strength to do that.
It is.
And only with the Holy Spirit can we ever get around to loving our enemies, let alone the people we actually do love. Forgiveness, prayer, being a peacemaker, grace. And like you said, this we did messages on all of these back in the series. And again, even then, we've probably just scratched the surface of and it's definitely not an exhaustive list. But Jesus did model these things for us. He encouraged them and he taught them.
So in all of this, it's one thing that we just share this list and you can write this list down, and it's really, really great. But there's an importance in the idea of demonstration and stories. And kind of like, as you sort of mentioned, we were naming the list, the idea of loving our enemies. There's probably a good reason we don't do this well. And it's because we maybe never had it really modeled well. And that's what I mean by demonstration and stories. We might know, because Jesus said it, they'll be like, yes, we know cognitively, we need to love our enemies.
Sure.
But it's a different story when we have nothing to model of how do we do that.
We've never seen anybody actually love their enemy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't see that a lot. Yeah. And so there is a great thing of this. And so when we talk about growing up in group identities, this happens actually on this what we call the right side, relational side, or fast track. We kind of use those when talking about this right side of the brain where group identity really forms. And the issue is typically in church, we appeal to the left side of the brain, which is the rational and cognitive. Now, that's good. That's fine. There's good things in that.
Yep.
But this group identity, this forming thing, as we talked about maturity, as briefly mentioned before, this is happening on the right side, which doesn't think in those cognitive terms. It actually thinks more in images.
Sure.
And so it needs demonstration and story to truly understand or how to respond. So when we get those big emotions, they're hitting us faster than the rational side of our brain can respond, and so our brain needs this updated database on how to remain ourselves. So essentially, pictures of what it means to be ourselves, to remain ourselves in the midst of these big emotions.
And that was really a powerful moment for me when we were going through this and reading it for the first time and taking the training. With Dr. Wilder's organization, and just the idea that telling a story helps you imagine what the person was going through, because they'll tell you the circumstances and their emotions, and if you know that person, you can easily picture them going through it, and it doesn't always have to be how they responded positively. It can be a story about how they failed completely. Absolutely. And then just reimagining how they might have done better if they had to do it again. And those types of stories, again, it's like you said, database, and I immediately think of my computer, but it's actually being stored in your brain.
Much like a computer.
And exactly. And so the more we hear these stories and imagine the stories, because when we hear stories, we think in pictures, and again, it's all right side of the brain, and that's actually how our brain changes, because then it has something. When we come up against the same situation ourselves, it can go in the database and say, "Oh, I have a story that reflects how we should respond in this way."
Yeah, and one of the things that they talked about being able to do is, like, you always first you be honest, like, if there's a time where you didn't return to yourself, to recall that story. And it's not about to beat yourself up. It's just being self-aware.
Yeah.
The times to tell the story when you did, even if it took a little longer or you did it immediately, it's good to have those stories to recall them. The other part of it, going back to the ones that they really encouraged us to do, was when it's a story that you didn't do well in.
Yep.
To then reimagine the story and, like, how would I like to have responded in that moment? And then you use your imagination, because that moment. And so even the rough moments are we don't sort of like, oh, let's not talk about that. It's a moment to, like, okay, I'd rather have done it this way. That helps update the database, so when it comes next time, there's a better chance that it'll happen that way. And so it is good to do that. But sometimes we do need those images references, because it's one thing when we're told we need to be patient.
Sure.
It's becoming a big thing for me, something I've even learned a lot through my parents. Is just like, but what does it mean to be patient? It's one thing to say that.
Sure.
And I think quite often, I know for myself, I've thought in order to be patient, I'm kind of like suppressing my frustrations.
Yeah.
And, and really I find out more and more, especially as I get more image of it, that it's not about suppressing.
No, not
it's learning about how to voice healthily those frustrations. But even more so, it's really about knowing what is mine, or my responsibility, or my place, what is mine to control and what is mine not to control.
Yeah.
And patience is when we start to control the things that were never ours to control.
Try and control
take responsibility, what is not ours to take responsibility for. And it's just like, oh, there's the patience. Make sure I'm still doing the thing that I need to do. It's okay to voice the frustrations that I might be having. But when it comes, knowing that difference, okay, this is not mine. This part is not mine. And then like, okay, I gotta be. Yeah, did you have a moment with different things?
Just gonna put me right on the spot.
Right on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I did read this over ahead of time, so I've been trying to think of something, and I think for me, this will be a demonstration of healthy correction too, is that you talked about being self-aware, and I'm not a patient person either. And sometimes I voice my frustration in a way that affects the tone of my voice,
right?
Especially when I'm talking with the people I love, and you know who you are. my
yes, I do.
And my son Spencer, who's our recording engineer.
Where did that come from?
Yes, and so even this past week, as an example, I said something and to my wife Mila, and she said, "I don't, you're saying this to me." She was very patient with me. She didn't get mad, but she said, "You're making me feel a certain way because of the tone of your voice." And I'm like, I didn't really intend that. Again, I think it's partially because I was impatient, or I was not wanting to be bothered. I think in the one particular case, right. and again, without even thinking about it, it just happened. I responded in a way with a tone of voice that made her feel a certain way that I certainly wasn't trying to do. And so, in becoming self-aware in that, I've had to go back several times and picture myself responding in a different way. Well, first of all, ask you, how do you want me to respond?
Right.
And so, and then actually picture myself doing it that way, so that in the future it just doesn't pop out of me that way.
Absolutely.
I get the chance to. I mean, this is when you're in a long-term relationship, you get lots of chances to practice. So that's something that popped into my mind when I read that today. That something I've learned, and I'm not a young man, and I can still learn things. And I'm happy to have been made aware of this training, because I think it has helped me in my relationships.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So as we connect with one another through joy and attachment love, which is really an important part of healing, because some of the reasons we could be responding the way we do is because of hurts and traumas.
Sure.
So joy and attachment love play a huge part, an integral part in being able to heal and grow in that group identity, because we do need to heal from those harmful things, because we've been demonstrated harmful ways, and then we kind of end up repeating it. So when we start to witness through these groups that are founded in the Hesed, attachment, love, and joy, we get to start to see healthy demonstration of this group identity.
That's great.
And what's really great is that we might be strong in some areas in how we return from big emotions and remain ourselves, and we might be weak in others. And then as a community, we actually help each other updating the database, because as we talked about, there's might be, we've talked about before, like there's certain of those big emotions that I return from a lot better than you do, and you return better than I do, and we then can demonstrate for each other better ways to do that. And I think I definitely can say for myself, I definitely have experienced that, where it's like, oh, hey, this is great. I saw Ron do this. Okay, that's a way better way than ever I did, and it just becomes a way of seeing it.
Yeah, and I would say the exact same with you on our staff and the rest of our staff, and even in my home group community that we're together a part of. I can see that, we help each other. Yeah. Because like you said, we're all strong in different areas, and it doesn't even have to take the form of healthy correction sometimes. Sometimes it does. Yep. But just, again, sharing the stories helps reaffirm how our group, how followers of Jesus respond when these triggering emotions are triggered to the big emotions happen. So
what can we do this summer? I think one of the things that's really important is we've encouraged through this whole thing about to people to read through the Gospels.
Sure.
And I think what I want to add to that maybe then is and I hope you're all doing this. As you're reading through it, that maybe you highlight some of the traits, even of the list that we gave, that you see Jesus doing, and what he, and how he taught it, what he demonstrated, and just, however you want to do it. If you're, if it's a paper, put the little highlight, make a little note. If it's, if you use Kindle, or if you use a Bible app, whatever it is, you just do highlight and just make little notes of, oh, here's Jesus talking about patience. Here's Jesus demonstrating compassion. And just as we can update those stories in our head and return to them, because that's another way that really helps is that we just kind of return to those stories. They become in our brain stronger and tighter.
Yeah, and that's something I encourage everybody to do, is to not just read them once. Sometimes we get the idea, oh, I've read that, I don't need to read it again.
Yeah.
But just rereading the stories helps you know them better. I always find it helps me to picture myself either in the crowd looking at Jesus, or just trying to imagine what Jesus is actually doing in certain situations as a person. Because lots of times we get this idea that Jesus was superhuman or not human at all, and he just acted perfectly all the time, and he never got tired or never got angry, and he never got frustrated. And I don't think that's the case. So he was very human, and you can see in some of the way he talks to the Pharisees and even his disciples, he is a little sarcastic, and he does voice frustrations, but he does it in a very healthy way.
Right.
And the more I read it, like you said, the more it updates my database, and really, really helps me, because one, they really are stories.
They are.
And that is very, very, and that's why when you think about it, it's such a great way. It's not a list of rules or things like that. There's stories about how Jesus reacted with actual people.
Yeah. And the other thing I just want to encourage is that for the summer is, one, it is important that we are growing in self-awareness. So being aware of both our strengths and our weaknesses. But this summer, let's focus on the positive.
Sure.
I'm not saying at the expense of the weakness. Let's focus on the positive and tell stories to each other when we get together, go out for coffee in our small groups, whatever it is. Tell each other stories of how we've remained ourselves, our group identity, while experiencing big emotions, and or tell stories of positive demonstrations that we've witnessed of others remaining themselves in the midst of those big emotions that we've been inspired by, that we maybe even use to update our own databases, things that are. And I just think with those two moments, whatever it is, tell a story about yourself. It's okay to tell those good stories about ourselves.
Yep.
Or tell again, or tell one that we've witnessed that has really been helpful for us.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to head into the summer in a positive way. So thank you again for joining us today. It really does help me, and I'm really excited about revisiting some of this stuff and actually putting it into practice. And again, like Jay just said, I think the thing to focus on this summer is to tell your stories, and maybe even reimagine some of the stories where you didn't do so well, and reimagine them in a positive light. And I know sometimes when we fail, it can be humorous, and or other people will find it humorous after the fact. But those are the things you remember, and then taking the time to reimagine them in a positive way, I think is really going to be helpful. It has been helpful to me. So thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time when we talk about healthy correction. Surprise!